Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. Adrian Byrne, Richie Forde here again with you, and this week we're answering a question from Black Bear Gym in Germany, and the question really was about the video that we did last week and the hierarchy of defensive skills, and we're going to look today at direct counters, particularly to side kick, which was the question that was asked. So if that's something that interests you, stick with us for this video.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So as Adrian mentioned, we're going to look at the direct counters for side kick today as our topic. So when we mention direct counters, what we're going to look at really are the ways to directly intercept your opponent. So we've seen that last week in our 5 ways to defend for ITF Sparring, and it was number 1 on the list. So of course everybody wants to have the answers to direct counters to the most common kick that we probably have in ITF, the side kick.
It makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll probably look at the 2 variations that we can have today. We'll have a look at the high section side kick coming at us and the middle section side kick. So essentially somebody kind of shooting towards the shoulder up towards the head, and then roughly towards the hip area for the middle side kick. So they're usually the most common versions we see.
I think it's kind of an important distinction that we draw in sparring as opposed to in the technical side of things, because if we're talking about pattern, then we're talking from umbilicus to the shoulder as middle, but we're really not talking about that as much in sparring. So we're very often talking about that middle side kick being something kind of from the hip to the elbow. It's aiming for that space under the elbow where there is usually a scoring opportunity. And although there are occasions when you want to kick mid-arm and you want to do things like that, for the higher part of it, effectively anything from the shoulder itself up really counts as high for our purposes and for the purposes of differentiating between the two. So, we don't want to break this down into kind of like a lower middle, upper middle, high kind of thing. You can't break it down that way when you're looking at the counter. Like, the very best that you can do is to say, right, that one's coming lower towards the hip and that one's coming higher somewhere, above. So I think that's kind of a good distinction to have before we show the clips.
Yeah, it's just a general principle is what we're aiming for here. It's not like an absolute concrete thing either. You got to kind of roll with it in terms of how dynamic the kicks are. They're not going to be exactly precise every time. So that's just the nature of the sport that we're in. So maybe let's have a look first at a very general principle that will guide us through what we're going to cover today. So basically what we're going to be looking at here when we look at a high section is coming underneath. So if we see this yellow line that we have here, you want to be coming underneath that line with your shots. So we'll be looking at some shots that you can use to come directly under that and roughly land a score in that red area if possible. Then on the flip side, for the middle side kick, we're looking to come above that line. Now in this example here of the picture, the kick is at full extension. So it's probably too late here to go with a direct counter. But it just gives us an idea of a middle side kick. So as that kick is coming up, you want to be coming above that yellow line to score. So usually you can do that with your hands, or you can do that with a variation of kicking options as well. So we'll have a look at some of these examples in today's video.
For sure. So maybe do we want to jump straight in with that middle side kick and have a look at a couple of those? Because the middle side kick is probably the most common thing most people will see when they're sparring.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the I don't know about the most commonly scored technique, but definitely one of the most commonly used techniques. So we'll start off first here with keying in with a lovely direct backhand.
Yeah,
one of the best options.
Just let that one run through one more time.
Yeah, so it's one of, as we just mentioned, based on the principle here, he's coming above that line, and obviously the hands are a great option there. You can use the front hand or the backhand to get above that line.
For sure. And it is, you can see that to balance the length of the side kick, there is a need for a bit of stretch here as well.
And here we have Martin Gidea using what we call the clash and go. So he clashes with the front leg and then it naturally brings his body forward to come above that line with his own hands to get a nice clear score.
And same again here with Thomas then.
Yeah, same shot again. It's very clear if you can get it, because there's something going on the legs as such, and then there's one person who's engaging up above that and one person is not. So visually for the judges, it's a nice clean score.
And I suppose it's one of those things that, we didn't see this very often until quite recently, and now more fighters are implementing it, and we can see where, it fits.
Definitely. Here's Louise again coming above that line. So you got to get the timing right here. The timing is one of the most important skills you need to be able to counter directly. You got to know the precise moment to go. And from working with Adrian before, one of the things that he mentioned to me when we were working together, when he was coaching, I was competing, he's just like, watch out for the lift of that toe. And it was one of the things you mentioned to me, Adrian, is when just as that toe pops up, that's essentially your time to go. Any later than that, it's not going to be on.
Yeah, and it's very true. And as we're kind of, looking to read the situation, there are patterns as well. So, like, a person will naturally fall into kind of a rhythm or a pattern, and it might not be that the very first shot that's thrown is the one that you're going to try and counter. It might well be that it is the later shot that you decide. You've started to see their pattern. You're reading their footwork, they're changing position. Maybe there's a little step that gives you a clue. Maybe the hand position changes, and that gives you that clue to go. But it's definitely a case of you're either trying to catch the foot just as it lifts off the floor, or almost as it's dropping back below the hip, again on its way back down from a kick, giving you the opportunity to go in. But for the direct counter, we kind of have to catch it on the way up. It's like we have to catch it in flight, because if we're waiting for it to come back down again, we're into something like the movement part. So that our second in the hierarchy, which is like the move and counter.
Yeah, definitely. We see a lot of people as well putting angles on their shots. Louise here doing a good example of it, putting a little bit of an angle on it. So not only are they getting themselves out of harm's way, but they're also giving themselves a little bit of an advantage in terms of an angle. So as Adrian just mentioned, what we're looking at here today is direct counter. So we're not really looking at what comes a second or two after that initial shot or that initial entry from the attacker, but it's that direct counter is what we're really focusing on today. So you notice that all of these generally follow that same principle that we spoke about, is coming over that line of that hip range really. And if you just get the timing correct on it, there's a nice shot there available for you.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it in those few little graphics beforehand, but another principle is, if it's a straight shot, go round. If it's a round shot, go straight, is kind of, a simple contrast or blending thing that we can talk about. And you can see that where there's a little bit of an angle put on it. In some cases, like here, it's just a case of Timothy has gone high and he's gone as the leg was coming up. But in general, we're looking to have that bit of a contrast, one going higher if the kick's coming lower, or as Andre Lee does here, he's picked an angle which has allowed him to, and he's invited the kick in the direction of the coach as he makes this little step, and then he picks the opposite angle. So again, quite clever use of the angle. And here, for the last couple of shots, we're looking at countering under the kick, which is much easier if the kick is high, but it's still effective if your timing and distance is right while the kick is low.
Yeah, and why this works for Vitali in particular is because he's able to remove his left hip here in this example, so he takes it out of the way and it allows him to switch his hips to get around. So as Adrian said, there's a good example as well, is one of the contrasting things for this principle is if someone is going direct, basically straight line with example side kick, then using a technique like a turning kick is more of a circular technique. So the contrast can either be changing the height. If they're shooting middle, you come above, or if it's a straight line, you come around. But you got to get your timing absolutely spot on with that, because the straight line, of course, is always the fastest route. So you got to be very precise if you're going to go that way.
I suppose there's a typical principle as well. Like we'd always say, you're better off to be acting than reacting. So the attacker always has some bit of an advantage here. But for the other person, they can, like in this case, they can be the ones who are dictating the rhythm. And if you are the one who's dictating the rhythm, then you do have, the opportunity to pull your opponent into your rhythm, and then you meet them like this, as Thomas has done, with the higher or the better position. So, to make the counter effective, particularly against the middle side kick, you do need to have a positional advantage over the kick.
Absolutely. And as we mentioned earlier, one of the most important takeaways in this is you're not really looking at the kick being at full extension.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be trying to counter it right at the very end. The one little exception, and I've dropped the clip in here, is that this one actually, with Ryan Shelley. It's like, if you're going to try and spin, it's Timothy Boss actually throws the shot, but if you're going to try and spin a side kick, you want it right on the extension, and ideally you'd like to catch the toes in your arm as you turn around to open up the body a little bit. So we have a couple of clips where you can almost show the what happens when you get this wrong. Because that's the one where it goes on the blooper reel. It's like, okay, that's not a bad idea, but when it doesn't go right, it usually lands you on your butt, and it's it doesn't feel great when that happens.
Yeah, definitely, because especially if you're spinning, chances are that somebody who is side kicking and they're a little bit clever, they will adjust that foot position to kind of go towards your back and to get that nudge to just knock you off balance while you're spinning on one foot. So the more advanced guys will watch out for that and try and almost adjust mid kick to catch you out there. So you got to be making sure the timing on your spinning counters in particular are very, very precise.
For sure. So that kind of takes us through the choice that we'd used for the middle side kick. So kind of to recap, the things that would be like super effective and what people will generally do is, if your timing is right and you're going over, hands are a great option, because what hands let you do, of course, is it's taking a very, very simple and effective tool that's preloaded. It's there. So what you've got to concentrate on is your timing. So as long as you're going in as the leg is coming up, and you didn't start from too far away, you should have an effective counter with the hands. We were talking about,
one of the beauties of the hands as well, Adrian, is that obviously the person is on one leg. So if you're pushing forwards, obviously it has to be this car crash kind of analogy of you have to close the distance to get to the hands.
For
so
sure.
Both sides are meeting together, and if one side is on one leg kicking and you're pushing with your hands with both feet on the ground, you have a nice advantage to get some momentum and get them on the back foot.
Absolutely. And then we could add a little bit of insurance with the hands, where if you are leading the direction, so circling to your back or suggesting a direction, and the person is aiming their side kick for where they expect you to be, and then you don't go to that direction, so it's the pull and stop, and then you go forward. So that allows you to have some angle on your shot. And whether it's, it doesn't have to be a major angle, you just want to take the full force of that kick off of your center line, so that even if it does catch you, it clips you, and then you're able to get through to hands. So again, that's huge. But to counter with the legs, like we did see some examples there with the reverse turning kick, we saw with the kicking under, it's quite hard, unless you make that angle first. So when the side kick is coming in, unless you have a very, very, very good read on it, it's difficult to get, around the kick. That's the beauty of the side kick. A good side kick is very difficult to get around. So you need to make an angle and go around that shot.
Yeah.
It's the other one. And there, the final really option we had was clash, which is just another variation of going over.
Yeah, definitely. But some nice options there. But one of the ones that I would try to avoid with my students is that spin.
Yeah.
It's a great option, and we're going to see it coming up here when it's a high section. But it can be a little bit messy, and it's more 50-50 in terms of your success rate, I feel, when you are trying to spin a middle kick. So it can be a one that doesn't give you the best results that you want.
Yeah,
always.
Absolutely. So do you want to have a look at these higher ones? So you get some fun options against those high side kicks, or it can even be a high turning kick, which is the beauty of this. You don't need to know what the kick is going to be, but if the chamber comes up high, it gives you these additional options.
Yeah, because you can see here, Colin, obviously he's very tall, but because he's chambering high, which is probably middle for him realistically, there gives an option of underneath, and David Kerr does a great job of spinning under that. And if it does nothing but disrupt Colin, that's a good positive for David. Here is Sarah with a lovely hook kick. So this is not really a particular high kick, but just the timing that she gets on it is the principle of a high kick, really. So she's allowing that hook kick to be an option by coming under.
Absolutely. And here we have taking the turning kick. So you can see Ryan has covered his body and laid back here, and it allows that extra little bit of stretch with the turning kick. And then finally we have a little bit of flamboyance and the x-ray shot from Toral here at the end, which again, the kick that's come in the first example of that isn't as high as what you'd like to see. I mean, it's not as guaranteed a shot, and he's had to go much lower to get there. But the idea is very, very simple. Of like that once the leg is up, if you can get your front shoulder under the extension of the kick isn't hitting you anymore, and then it's just a case of carrying on your movement through and finding a scoring shot on the other side. Tural has tried the back fist here, but we'd often get to the other side into a turning kick, or we get to the other side into a reverse turning kick, something like that, to get, you know, a simple score now that you've improved your ring position.
Yeah, so we can see when we go back and think about the principle that we laid out at the start, you can see all these kicks are just coming in that gap between the knee and just like underneath the knee, so they're kind of coming under that small space that's available to get into the scoring area. So ideally, when you're countering a high section kick, you're going to be coming to the body most likely with your shots. So obviously the extra is a bit different. It's not exactly a direct counter, and the movement is what's a direct movement, but the counter just comes a little bit after. But it's a nice one to show as an example for sure.
Yeah.
But what we want to have a look at as well with the high section is being able to have options to, like, essentially, if somebody has a very high chamber and they're coming at you and they're putting pressure on you, it's very, very difficult. So you need that in your toolkit essentially as usually a spinning option. But then if it's on the flip side, so when we see the opposite stance to David Kerr and Colin,
right versus left or whatever it happens to be,
exactly, you can use the one that we seen Vitali use in the middle clips earlier, where he came off the back leg and came under with the back leg turning kick. So that's a nice one as well. And often your rear shoulder when you start will be your front shoulder as you kick, and that comes under their kick, and it just gives you that little bit of a gap to fit under the kick again. The same principle to find a middle section turning kick off the back leg. So that's the other option depending on the stance.
Yeah, and even because you're throwing off your back leg, it often gives you an opportunity to take your head off the line as well, just as you go, which, you know, is helpful in that case. But you know, the deal here is, you know, and I think there's a big difference between the male and the female game in some ways on in what we're looking at there. We tend to find that the guys, a bit like Vitali or Timothy Boss, you know, when they take that front leg up, it's typically explosive and it's covering the distance in one hop, maybe two hops max, but they're looking to get that direct score off the front leg if they can, but they're probably using that to create enough movement from the opponent. So if you move back in a straight line off of that shot, it's letting them land and connect to hands, it's letting them do things like that because they've created that big movement. And so you have to kind of respond to the first lift, or you have to be circling off. You know, you can't let them push you on that straight line, and you know, because once you start moving backwards quickly, you can't reverse direction, change direction, or pull a counter very easily, and you've handed the advantage over to them. So that's a case of you either spoil it in the beginning, or you get out of dodge, get off that line.
Bail out.
But it's different in the girls' game because the initial carry doesn't tend to be as fast. You know, the explosiveness right now isn't as fast, but it carries for longer, so it can present a threat that people have to move around, I find. So if you look at, I mean, there's a good example on Master de Silva's Techers page with Tyra Barada and was in the final of the female in the final of the female 45 juniors from Bosnia, Taylor yeah.
Smith.
So but you'll see they can both pick up that front leg and carry, but the initial push off isn't as dramatic, which means that you can often set the feet once and then take the counter into the shot. So that's where I think for the girls, either that high hook kick under or the reverse turning kick, if they have it, is it's hugely valid because it's disruptive. It's breaking the momentum that shot would otherwise have. And I mean, that becomes huge because if you've got that height, or we say the kicking height advantage, that range advantage, that can be the end of the match if the other person hasn't got a solution for it, because they have to back up so much. They start conceding ring position, they start conceding warnings, eventually something lands, and then you're just under trouble. You know, you're in trouble and you have to come through this high chamber to come forward. And the only option for some people is fatigue them, move them until the leg drops. Whereas if you have a shot, even if it isn't going to land all the time, if they have to consider picking the leg up and they might lose their head to a band-aid, well, okay, I'll think about picking my leg up a bit different.
The threat is real, yeah.
The threat is very, very real, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things as well with the elite guys that you'll see with this particular like side kick is it's like a day one kick that you learn in ITF Taekwondo. But the guys that are elite at this, they're able to almost disguise their chamber really well. So although the chamber may seem like it's high, they can very seamlessly transition between high section and middle section. So it's very hard to read it. So you need to put yourself in a situation where you're actively reading that in training, so you can kind of get an internal kind of almost like an internal radar of when to go and what to use, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's what you need to do in training. You need to work with people who have different types of side kicks, different types of knee position, so you can almost read the different types and get experience on how to deal with the different solutions, because not everybody's chamber is the same. It depends on like their range of motion, their hips and things like that. So being able to deal with the different types of side kicks is a very, very important skill to have. As we said, the timing and the distance and essentially the shot selection are very, very important skills within that. So you got to put yourself in that experience of dealing with different types of side kicks in a real active situation, not just a willy-nilly side kick thrown at you and you kind of come under at one of these lovely counters that we picked in today's video. That's not going to work. They gotta basically be throwing real side kicks at you, where you have to make the decision to go with a direct counter that's effective. You get trial and error based on that then. So some will work, some will not, and you adjust. So that's the real way to build the skills for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important that people realize you don't need all of the counters. You need an answer. So, you know, if you have something that works against the middle side kick and that's it for you with your facing, you probably need one against a right-legged and one against a left-legged fighter based off your stance, and the same for the high one. But you don't need to have every available one, and you don't necessarily need to practice all of them. You know, it's better to have one that works for you consistently, and then maybe start to layer on another technique if you need it. But, you know, trying to learn all of them at the same time is often, you know, a bit of a trap as well. I think just the one thing I want to say in terms of the practicing of that as well is, what you might think initially is that you're going to actually be bouncing there, someone will pick up their leg and you're going to see it and you're going to make the right reaction, and you might, you know, it could happen, but it's far more likely that you, if you're in your movement, you're subtly inviting the shot that you want to counter, you have a much better chance of making that happen. So you know, if you are sitting into the front of your stance a little bit, dropping your front shoulder and leaving your front hand down, maybe that headshot is going to seem like a better option for them, like, because there's no target on your body, it's covered, you're sideways, the head is open, it's leaning forward, it looks good. That may be the one that gives you the chance to shift back into the turning kick, or to, you know, to go under the leg. Whereas if you're standing taller, you know, you're floating the front hand up and, you know, moving that about, they might say, okay, well, there's no point in going high here, you know, I'll go to the body. And, you know, in combination, your gesturing, your hand signals, your, you know, where you put your head, how you're moving, will suggest to your opponent what they might actually be successful with. And as much as we know we're doing that to each other, we're reacting to that visual stimulus and we're taking what's on the table. So, you know, if you want to be successful in countering, like we've always said before, you have to lead, you have to set the person up. Traps within traps within traps.
Yeah, like you see the best counter fighters ever, no matter what sport, whether it's like Floyd Mayweather, even Milosh, who we've done some clips on in ITF.
Yeah.
The best guys that are counter fighters, they essentially make the attack or the entry shot, whatever you want to call it, from their opponent happen without them realizing, and then they're that step ahead. So the best counter fighters are always a step ahead. They're not reactive, like you said. They're proactive.
So hopefully that's helped people to get the, you know, some ideas, something to put into your sessions in terms of direct counters to that front leg side kick. Whether it's middle or it's high, whether they're right-legged or left-legged, you should have something to take from that video. I think we already have our topic for next week, Richie. Do you want to give a sneak peek on that one?
Yeah, so next week we'll maybe focus a little bit more on hand. So let's have a look at the blitz for next week. So we'll see some direct counters available for that. Again, it's a technique that's very common, and some people have a lot of problems with that, so hopefully we can help people out covering the direct counters for blitz in next week's video. So if you're new and this is your first time tuned in, make sure and subscribe, and so you don't miss that one. And if you're already part of the TKD Coach Academy crew, make sure and hit this video a like on YouTube and share it on your social media, and we will catch you in the next one.
Best luck, everyone. Bye bye.